Hi, Zizaran here with another video for Path of Exile University, a series aiming to teach especially new players a lot more about Path of Exile. This will also be like not a complete beginner episode, that's mostly like the two first ones. This is going to continue a little bit on the how to get geared. This is going to be about identifying an item worth, and this isn't just about like price checking for Trade League, but it is also going to be talking about understanding why an item is good, what's good about it, and what kind of stats you're looking for on items. So that's what we're aiming to explain in this episode here. How to know when your items are good. Identifying items. Let's see, it's full screen. Right. So for like a lot of builds, and this is important no matter what, but we're going to be approaching it a lot from a solo self-found point of view, because it's not just if the item is worth, as in like people will buy it, but it'll be also like, is this usable for a build? Like when a lot of people ask if an item is good, what they're really asking is, can I sell this for 20 exalted orbs? And there are some like price check macros, and the reason why you'll sometimes get, as a streamer, you'll have people asking like complete trash items that their price check macro has told them is worth 20x. God knows why, but most of those price check macros are very, very off. They can be pretty useful on unique items and stuff. But yeah, so we're going to be talking about a lot of things here, like economy and stuff like that as well. And that's like the two different choices. So yeah, the first one is the build approach, with a gear with the most amount of modifiers that do affect your build in a positive way, and especially the rules being highly tiered. And then you have the market approach, which also like relies a little bit more on you having knowledge about other builds. Can be very, very difficult when you're new to the game. And part of the reason why when I was a new player, I tried to go like, okay, I've played spell builds, I have a good idea of what spell builds need. Now I need to play melee, then I need to play bow build, and that way you sort of build up, because you can fairly quickly learn by playing what are good stats and what are good combinations for your build. But I remember I early on played pretty much only melee, and I had no idea what spell builds were or what was good on them, right? So that's how it went for me. I probably back then vendored loads of things for like spark builds or whatever that was worth a lot. And part of the market approach too is that it helps a lot if you know what the current meta is, right? There are some leagues where like all leagues where essence drain is very popular, and essence drain items will sell for a shitload. So knowing that is very, very important. Right. So an item has high market value based on a few different things. You want good stats, you want good rolls, and good stats also means like a lot of the time they want to be a good combination. And then it also needs to have high demand. There could also be the fact that you can, in like, if something is like very, very niche or something, we'll have more examples of this later, but sometimes like you'll happen to have someone's like build enabling item, or to change his skill point or save his skill point, you might get a lot of money out of that too. So we'll be one example here that I can give is there are jewels you can put on your skill tree. And let's say somebody is playing a Sunder build, right? They want physical damage, they want life, and they want attack speed with one-handers or whatever they're using, but you also have 12 intelligence on your jewel. Well, maybe the build they're playing is very low in intelligence, and that actually allows them to save a skill point. So stats are very, very like undervalued by a lot of new players, but a lot of people will pay a lot for them. Maybe you'll find a ring with 70 life and it doesn't have any resist, or maybe only one resist, but it has 50 int or 50 dex. and sometimes both. There are also entire builds based around stat stacking, which we'll talk a little bit about later. But part of the reason why these things sell so much, I've several times when playing trade leagues sold things like this for 3, 5, and even 10x because so few people pick them up. And that can change the market a lot. But always do keep a lookout for like things like a ring with 60, 70 life and 50, 55 of a stat. That could be very good for a lot of people. And yeah, like an item could be like niche and good as well. Like this is something that's going to get just easier the more you play, the more builds you've done, and you start recognizing what sort of like groups are good together. And if there is high demand on something, you'll notice that things sell like popcorn. Let's see. So yeah, determining if an item is good is highly dependent on what your build needs. You'll normally notice like socket or stat groups that are really good together. And hopefully most of the time, the build guide that you're following should give you an idea. What I do in Path of Building, which is a like third-party tool that shows builds, is I will like give examples of gear both for early game and end game of what it should look like. And other builds will also like give you an idea of these are the rules you should be looking for. Octavian had some really cool pictures for his guides that he was like showing like how expensive things should be and what they would look like. And yeah, like we remind people of this again with, if you have, for example, a sword with 130% fist damage, if that's on a wand, it still doesn't like increase the damage of blade fall or ethereal knives. Even though they're a physical spell, the increased physical damage isn't actually increasing the damage. It would have to be on your skill tree or on an amulet or something to make it global. So it's a little bit complicated there, obviously. But hopefully most build guides should be like giving you a fairly good idea of what kind of gear you should go for. Do remember, and I'll show it in game again, but advanced mod descriptions, very, very important just for having on all the time. You scroll down here to user interface, and it just gives you more stats on an item. And do remember, an item is more valuable both in selling and not by having an open suffix. So like this ring that I have here, normally only has the fire, cold, life, and mana, and mana is actually a really, really good stat as well that a lot of players, especially new ones, will not think about or not care about, and will be like, oh, mana. But this has a open prefix and an open suffix, so you have a lot of like, you know, most people would craft resistances here. And do remember that even on the Path of Exile website, you can search for items with open suffixes and prefixes. I'll show you that in a second because it's a great way to, and we'll also show you how to like search for cheap items a little bit. But we do have like a bargain hunting episode on Friday that we're going to go super hard on that. But we want to show a quick few tips. Also, if you're playing on trade and you're going to list an item, don't list this without the lightning crafted because it'll show up in a lot less searches. Not that many players are going to search for fire, cold res, and open suffix. Most people would be searching for a like total amount of resistances. So if you're trying to sell something and the craft is cheap, chuck it on there and it'll appear for more people, especially new players. So now we're going to do pathofexile.com/trade. And I'll show you that you can search for empty prefix and empty suffix. And we'll be covering this a lot more in the bargain hunting on Friday. I'll talk a lot about pathofexile.com/trade and stuff like that. Let's see. There. Also, another way to learn a little bit about what items are good, you could just like watch or read guides by other players for different builds. That's honestly not a bad idea. So, when you're looking at defensive items, what do you look for? what do you look for when you're looking for like one item? So here on defensive stats, right? Generally, on most items, life is a pretty safe bet. Um, Once you start looking at energy shield items, the base itself is a lot more important. That's because they scale off the flat energy shield that's on the item itself, whereas life is pretty much okay on everything. Um, so on a life item, you can get it on pretty much every base. Doesn't matter what it is. If you get an item with like 110 life, 30 cold rest, 30 lightning, that's great. However, if you have a simple robe with the highest energy shield roll, still not good. So as a quick rule of thumb, the items for energy shield builds, you would want a Val Regalia, Sorcerer Gloves, Hubris Helmet, or Sorcerer Boots, Titanium Spirit Shield. They're like the 5 different bases that have the highest energy shield. And then, armor and evasion are decent if you, like, they're especially good with each other. So if you have the flat, getting the percentage is good as well. And then it sort of like compounds the item. How many more, like an item with 4 really good stats can be a lot more important than 3, but to a degree where it's what's the word I'm looking for? Scales non-linearly. Exponential. It's like exponential growth in value. Like a ring, for example, a ring that has 70 life, 23 cold rest, and 40 fire rest, but then has life regen, would be worth a lot less than one that just doesn't have the life regen or has 40 lightning rest there instead. That would be the difference between the first ring maybe costing anywhere from 5 to 20 C Chaos Orbs, and the latter with the really high lightning rest or open lightning rest for suffix to craft could be worth like 1 to 5x depending on the rolls. So there's like exponential value there and also exponential usage to you. And obviously it's harder to get something with multiple rolls. And like maximum elemental resistance can be found on like some items as well. Converting damage, which we haven't really talked about a lot, but sometimes you'll see items have 10% of fire damage, 10% of physical damage taken as fire. So it's actually written the wrong way here, but like physical damage taken as fire damage. And a quick idea of why this is good in a lot of builds is sometimes you'll have a build with 0 to no physical mitigation, but every build is going to have 75 at least fire resistance. So sometimes what chieftains will do is you might not have that crazy high fist mitigation, but you could get maybe 20 or 30% of the fire damage, physical damage taken as fire. And that's very strong then, because then you're mitigating a large amount against your 75 instead. And there's like multiple sources of less damage taken. Some other cool combinations that are good here is we can look at tricksters. And for like everything with like energy shield and also evasion, I guess. Let's see. Should just be able to log on every trickster here. No, not that one actually. This one should work. The base type is pretty important. So trickster especially has a really, really cool mechanic in the ascendancy tree called escape artist. And if you see here, it has especially the second line being important, but also the first. Let's see. But 5 evasion rating per 1 max energy shield on your helmet, but then +1 maximum energy shield per 6 evasion on the body armor. And this is insanely strong because that means that you're not losing any, it's only a plus. And that means that a chest like this on a Sadist Garb or Carnal Armor are the 2 best evasion energy shield hybrids. And this means that this would be, I think, around similar as a 700 Val Regalia or something for energy shield. Plus, you still get to keep the evasion. If I whip out a calculator here, just 1392 divided by 6. So, okay, so it's more like 560. But it can be very, very hard to roll like very high Val Regalias. And it's fairly easy. This you can see is like just a crafted one. It's actually got pretty low rolls, and it's still like a very, very good chest. Even without discipline turned on, my character has 8,000 energy shield. So for new players, can very, very easily be like, wow, is energy shield so much easier to build? And you can see, like I said about the base types here earlier, right? 130 energy shield here, and this is very, very trash gear on a character that I didn't play a lot. It was just 1 day, 6 hours. And even then, you see that it has 8,000 energy shield, 300 life basically on my helmet. Really, really cool. But yeah, Trickster is a good example of how like armor, evasion, energy shield can be good for different things. Armor and evasion could also be good for like iron reflex build stacking, and I'm sure some of you will be following builds doing that. And then you have to think about what do you look for in a single item for weapons. And there's so many things to look for here. Obviously, the more you play, the easier it is going to get. You have loads of different caster weapons with spell damage, elemental damage. It can be hard to understand like the difference between spell damage and elemental damage. Some quick examples: spell damage would work on Essence Drain. Spell damage will work on Essence Drain, but elemental damage won't. Elemental damage would work on heralds, but spell damage won't. So there are a lot of like annoying things like this, which is just a headache for new players. Flat added damage to spells would work on freezing pulse, but not on essence drain, and not on heralds as well. And then you do have to decide as a player whether you're going crit and crit multiplier. And again, here is another one where you'll see exponential value, where even just a item having crit or crit multi or not could increase the value by a large amount. And then you have like the +1 level of gems being such a large amount of value here as well. You have to realize that for attacks, with the exception of like elemental hit, for example, would be an attack skill that does scale from levels. But if you're using Reeve, Sunder, Blade Flurry, it will not get much or anything at all from getting +1 level. They are like making it do like a little bit more. Sometimes you'll get Radius. Things like Power Siphon gets 1 additional attack or projectile. But generally, gem level is king for active gems, like spell gems. And then the attacks would be like Caustic Arrow, Toxic Rain, and Elemental Hit. Chaos damage over time multiplier as well. Anything with multiplier is very more gooder in Path of Exile. It makes you very warm inside to see anything with multiplier. And a lot of people will call the game Path of Multipliers, because multipliers multiply with themselves as well. So if you have 30 chaos damage over time multiplier, that will multiply with other multipliers. And that's how we get the millions and millions of damage to make bosses go very smooth. Cast speed, obviously a very good stat. Gain X of elemental damage as extra chaos damage can be very, very strong. It's basically a more multiplier as well, because it's if you have 10,000 lightning damage and you get 20% lightning damage as extra chaos, you're getting 2,000 extra damage as chaos. And that would also be scaled by your global generic scaling. A lot of the time you're not scaling everything here, but they are very, very good as well. And hopefully the guide you're following will follow, or like hold your hand a little bit. At the start of a league as well, crit is like, a lot of people aren't buying crit as much at the start of a league. A lot of people will do something called elemental overload, which is a lot easier to scale than crit. It's this node here, which makes that your critical strikes do not deal extra damage, so it's not using its critical multi, but you do get 40% more elemental damage, which is kind of similar to having like a level 8 or 12 control destruction or elemental focus. So you just get a bunch more elemental damage. It's very, very good early in the game. And then obviously crit, once you start getting crit capped and getting a lot of crit multi, then that will always be better, but it is also a large investment. Elemental overload is 1 point. If you're traveling close to it, it's very, very good to pick up. A few more things. Let's see. A few more things I want to show some examples and items here for what's worth. Log back on my Sunder character. Now, generally, there's a golden rule, or has been a golden rule until heist, that if you want a good PDPS, physical DPS item, you want high attack speed, high flat physical, and high percentage physical. This is not necessarily true anymore because of the Champion Grand Slam Impale build, where you don't really care about the attack speed because the item has like a cooldown. Similar to for a build like Essence Drain, you don't care about cast speed because Essence Drain lasts like 8 or 9 seconds and you're not going to be spamming your Essence Drain. It doesn't stack new stacks. There are exceptions there, like Toxic Rain does stack, but when something only has like one thing at a time that you just renew, then cast speed's not good. And here with this build, attack speed isn't good. So for things like Cyclone, Sunder, and a lot of builds, attack speed is normally key. So you would want to get like a fairly high attack speed base. That'll also make better use of flat physical on items like rings and amulets and stuff. Here on this build, which might get nerfed next league, we don't know that. All you would want to look at here would be like a really, really high physical number here. Okay, I hate everything. I don't know why that changed. But a really, really high physical number here would be what you're looking at. And that's because of the way the build works, is that it's not about attacking fast. You kind of only get to attack only 4 seconds on this build. So you want to make sure that the hit is as big as possible. And it also means that a physical weapon might actually not even end up being usable if it has like 180. Like this one has 190% physical damage, but if it didn't have that flat physical, it wouldn't actually be usable. This one, for the build I'm playing, doesn't actually need the attack speed, but it is completely reliant on the flat physical. So you need to either be able to craft the missing one, or it might not be usable at all. And then for like a similar example for caster stuff would be spell damage, flat damage to spells, and then cast speed would be an example. Let's see. So, as I said, the fizz damage, X to X fizz damage, attack speed, accuracy can be really good for a lot of builds, and then crit. Completely depends what you're going for. If you're going for a resolute technique melee build, which means you cannot crit ever, or for example, a Slayer doesn't need base crit on their weapon because their Ascendancy can give base crit, and stuff like that. And it's a lot easier at league start to itemize for resolute technique because, like I said, critical will end up needing a large investment on the skill tree. Like you're gonna need like quite a lot of skill points, as well as having the fist damage. So a lot easier to build for resolute technique and not having to get accuracy. And when you do a crit build, haha, when you do a crit build, you also want to make sure your accuracy capped, because when you're using a diamond flask, which gives you a lucky roll, which means that it will say you have 60% chance for a crit, it will do that roll twice and take the higher result. So if it's yes, no, or no, yes, it's still a crit. But it will also roll your accuracy twice. So accuracy, very important for crit builds. And then you have these stats for bleed builds with increased damage with bleeding, and damage over time multiplier. And then there are some more like advanced stats there as well from, like, for example, elder items with socketed gems deal more damage with bleeds, or however the wording is. So generally crit is always better for the most part, but it's more of an investment, and you can't always do it early game. So, what do you look for in a single item on jewels? So, jewels is something you put in the Path of Exile skill tree or in some items. And they can buff your builds in a lot of different ways. And we're also going to be showing how to do some really, really extensive searches here. We'll go very, very in depth in this in the PoE bargain hunting thing. But you can see here some of the things you want. So you want damage generally on your jewels, and something like you can have up to 4 stats on a jewel, and I'll show what jewels look like. And I'm also going to jump on a different character here because we can also show off things like stat stacking, like we talked about earlier. And these are more advanced things, but I do want to cover it a little bit because even if you're not going to play it yourself, it's important to know about because it can be valuable. Right, let's see. So a jewel, there are unique ones and stuff, but a jewel will look like this. It's a cobalt jewel. There is also viridian jewels, crimson jewels, and abyssal jewels. And we'll like cover and look at a few different ones here. But jewels are very, very good for damage. I would say the #1 mistake that new players do is that new players will underestimate both flasks and jewels. Sometimes people will be following guides by me, Mathil, or anyone else, and a lot of players will know this feeling of they feel like they have very similar gear, and they're watching us just like crushing everything, and they're not able to kill anything. And a lot of the time when I examine those people's builds, they don't have jewels or they don't have flasks, and both of those are insanely strong. Sometimes where 80 to 90% of your build, or at least 70 to 80, can be just flasks and jewels. I've actually had builds where I've spent 1 or 2 exalts on my gear and then 80 or 90 exalts on my jewels, and that would be the majority of the power. This build being an example of jewels being extremely powerful. This is a harvest character, which is currently not core, and a lot of the things are going core. We just don't know how, so we can't really cover harvest until the next semester. But here I've got some basically perfect jewels. This is an in-stacking build, and we just want loads of attack speed, loads of damage, and you can see how much power you can get out of jewels, because intelligence for this build is damage, which a lot of new players aren't familiar is even a thing you can do. And look at this jewel. It's 5% attack speed, 6% attack speed, 7% attack speed, and 4% attack speed, which is like better than a lot of notables or keystones, right? It's like it's an insanely amount of good power you can get on jewels. And there are no item levels on jewels. If you have an item level 10 cobalt jewel, that can roll everything. There's corruption item levels, I think. It's also different on the searching, murderous, ghastly, hypnotic jewels. The abyssal ones, they do have item levels that matters. But as you can see, this is like an example of a perfect jewel. But even getting like 3 damage stats can often, especially for an off-meta build, be very cheap. We're going to teach you a little bit on how to search for them. We'll be going more in that on Thursday. But yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that here. But on this build, like, I had a lot of people following this build, but they didn't invest into the jewels, and they had very weak builds. Flasks as well, and rolling flasks properly can also be a huge, huge power spike, especially with unique flasks. And there are some special modifiers as well. I'd say a large majority of the player base will be getting their onslaught from a searching or murderous eye jewel with onslaught on kill. That is a really, really good way to get it. It means you can drop your onslaught flask. You don't need to waste a slot on that. Or you can also not use a support gem. Most players will start out using onslaught support and get rid of that once they can get it from a jewel or from a flask. It's actually easier to roll it on a searching eye than a murderous. I don't know if I have one on this build. I don't know that I do. How do I get onslaught in this build? Maybe I don't. Maybe I don't. But either way, it's something you can roll on a searching eye, which we can go show, because loads of my characters should have this. Just so people know what stat to look out for. Oh, I think I get it off my Herald on that build. Let's see. You should have one. No, it doesn't. Most of my builds usually have it. Sometimes in their belt. Let's see. My gauntlet characters, or I mean, actually these characters have it. This is a great example. Yes, you're right. Actually, that character I was just on actually gets its onslaught from Slaughter, which is also a good way of getting it for melee characters. This character has onslaught somewhere, right? I must do. Here we go. This is what I wanted to show. And this is another example of a really powerful jewel. Very, very lucky. An onslaught is something you should try to fit on every single character because it's movement speed, attack speed, and cast speed. And it's just, it makes life feel better. Everything feels better. So this is a really good one. It has life and onslaught and crit multi. I always settle for even just like 4% chance to onslaught. That's enough for me to use a jewel slot on it or pop it in my belt while I'm trying to roll for a better one. So, and if you, then I would try to upgrade to 7 or 8% chance to onslaught. And this is something I would actually divine as well, because having 8% chance feels really good and it's up pretty much all the time. And then my next step would be to try to get onslaught and life. And I try to do this for pretty much every character. We'll do some examples on Zizaran Smart real quick of in-stacking gear, because that is the #1 thing that a lot of both in and strength stacking and deck stacking, I guess, is like one number thing that they don't play themselves. So then it's very difficult to know that the gear is worth picking up and selling. Now, again, this is a harvest character, so it has like basically perfect gear, but I'm going to be highlighting some of the important things to look at. That's a bad example because it's fractured. So the #1 things to look for especially mostly int and strength stackers, but especially int stackers, if you find something that has high intelligence and increased elemental damage with attack skills, they would generally be very, very expensive, because most of these builds are using elemental damage, either through a wand called Hawa, Hand of Wisdom in Action, or it'll be using a wand similar to mine. These are actually surprisingly easy to craft still, not with all the additional damage stats, but with the line you can see here, which is adds 1 to 6 lightning damage to attacks with this weapon per 10 intelligence. And you can still do these. So you'll see that all the gear on this character will have intelligence on it. And that means that, for example, having a helmet which has high energy shield but also high int would skyrocket the value, right? And all of the gear on this character is like basically perfect, but I just want to make sure that you guys understand that stats can be very valuable on items, and to maybe take an extra look and try to figure out, like, would people use this? And there's loads of different stat stacking items. The Shaper gloves, for example, is very, very popularly used in this. There's like a chest that gives you energy shield for strength, and there's a lot of cool ways. A lot of cool ways there. So it's worth paying attention to. Other special modifiers on a jewel is phasing and unholy might. Movement speed if you've killed recently. Movement speed always feels really good in Path of Exile. Phasing lets you run through monsters, especially important in Delve. Makes it so that you aren't stuck, etc. So that's really, really good. And obviously life or energy shield, especially on hardcore on your jewels, is very good. Let's see. Let us show you a quick like search here. I haven't played Tradely that much lately, so I don't use pathofexile.com to trade as much as I should. You should always use this because it's better. But let's see. We are going to do a new, let's see, add a stat group. We're going to add a count. Let's see. And this can be an sorry. So what we're going to do now is finding jewels for your build can be kind of hard. So let's go, we're going to go on a different build to make it easier. Something that's played more. So let's go on Zizaran Bonk Bonk. And we're going to look at ground zam. I'm using, so things that are important to remember here is I am using an attack, I'm using a two-handed axe. It is AoE, it is melee, attack, slam. Like, make sure that you look up here at the tags of the thing you're using. And we are going to show you how to search for stuff here. So, I'm playing hardcore. So I want always maximum life, right? And then if I search any jewel, doesn't matter. Let's say that I search on, maybe there's people playing flashback. I'm just going to click search just to make sure there's someone. Okay, so let's see. And we're going to do 2 searches here. We'll show the difference. Actually, we'll show the basic search first. So somebody might have been following a build guide, where somebody in the build guide, as examples, are doing axe damage or something. They have damage with axes. There. That's the jewel. That's the jewel they have in their guide, right? And there's not even any found, right? A life, attack speed, and damage jewel, right? This happens very often because a lot of people don't know how to do these multi-searches. So what I'm going to show you now, and we can search offline too, that's true. See if that helps. Where is offline? Let's see. Let's see. Any, so that it's even without prices. And then here, any. And even then, it's showing none. So we'll have the same options on this. Now, watch this. Flashback is over. But it still shows up on search. It still shows up on search. It's fine. There's literally just none for sale. There's literally just none for sale. There's 2 hours left. Okay, cool. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter for this. I just want to make sure that this is something that happens to a lot of new players. People will be very specific with what jewel is in the build guide, and people will search maybe only for that and then ignore jewels entirely, or maybe end up with a jewel like this, or with only 2 damage stats, right? This is very, very common. Happens a lot, and you saw how rare the jewel was. So we're now going to go through the list and think about all the things we can add to the jewel. So we can do increased physical damage. We can do increased physical damage. And then we just have to like go through, let's see, with axis. Whoops. That one. Not the implicit one. That's very important. We can search for two-handed weapons. I think the wording on jewel is actually just damage with axes. No, it is physical damage. Oh wait, we'll put all of them because it doesn't matter how many you put here. It doesn't matter. Let's see. The tilde technique. I don't even know how to make tilde on my keyboard because I have a Norwegian one. It doesn't actually work because the normal tilde button doesn't. Anyway, doesn't matter. And then we're gonna search for attack speed. Attack speed. Two-handed weapon. Next to all. Yeah, I tried that. It doesn't work. I tried all per all. I know how to normally do it. It just doesn't work on PoE Trade. I don't want to copy paste from chat. It doesn't matter. Shh. Not reading chat anymore. Let's see. And we're just going to go through here and get every mod. And the skill we're using is an area of effect as well. Area damage. You can pretty much always do increased damage. Minions don't, but most things do. Let's see. And there's quite a bit more things that we can add. We had axis. We have two-handed. Did I grab all the two-handed ones? And the more you think about it, and then you have to decide whether you're crit or not, and stuff like that. So then you can look at this, and for some builds you could have like a really, really long one. You can have a really, really long one. For some builds I've had like, 15 different ones that I want. And then first we're gonna look for a perfect jewel, which would be 3 of the damage stats with a low on life. This might not even exist, It might not even exist, but you know, maybe sometimes you get lucky. And there are actually 4. Here we see there's a life, area damage, attacking cast speed, and damage with two-handed weapons. Whereas um, when we were searching very specifically, we couldn't even find uh, life and 2 damage stats that were specific. But when we search for like all of them, we can get a lot more. So now we have 10. And then let's make it more similar that we're searching for only 2 damage stats and life. And this is only in flashback, right? This isn't even a long league. Now there's 460 for sale. And then when you're searching like this, you could also scroll through and peruse the list and see like, oh, this one's pretty cheap and also has strength or int or dex or resist. So there's so many. And then if we're like, maybe you're playing softcore, you want to save a lot of currency, you don't care about life. What's this thing? Life? What if I just want 4 damage mods? Well, there's some of those too, and they're not that expensive. So there's a lot of things there, and we'll cover that more in depth on bargain hunting on Friday. Then there's also jewelry, and we'll cover like trading for jewelry and stuff on the bargain hunting. But generally, there you want as a minimum on everything you're wearing, your rings and amulet. I would say you minimum want a life roll, 1 resist, and then a crafted resist, like a spot for a crafted resist. That should be the minimum of your gear. If you're like watching this right now and then you look at your character, watching this, look at your character back and forth, and you see that you have a ring with like 7 to 13 fire damage to attacks, 7.6 life regen, 26 fire resist, and 13 life, you probably need to get a new ring. Like there is like a threshold here where I would say at least 2 useful stats plus a crafted one should be the bare minimum for all your items. And then obviously with influenced items, sometimes with influenced items, it is actually okay to only have 1 stat. Explosion chest can be very, very hard to roll. Sometimes people very easily justify only using an explosion chest. And like I said earlier as well, a large amount of stats can be very, very important here for jewelry. Now, early on, most people are going to use leather belts, and then fairly quickly, once you get into maps, you start thinking about switching to a Stygian Vise. That is a belt that has a abyssal socket, and the abyssal socket is instead of the 40 life on a Stygian. So there's not that much else choice. Sometimes people use unique belts. Very few people use crystal belts because there's only 80 energy shield. And on a jewel you can get like 30, 40 energy shield plus 2 or 3 damage mods. So the jewels are just so strong even after the nerfs that they beat out every other implicit. The only other thing is sometimes there'll be like elder belts, shaper belts, etc. that you need for build enabling things. Like for example, shaper belts can have cooldown recovery increases. Elder belts can have life recovery rate. Other than that, you pretty much always go for a Stygian. But it's pretty hard to make a influence Stygian. It ends up being way too expensive for most players. So, if you just want to sell it, which is for a lot of players, they don't want to think about what other builds they're going to make in the future and stuff like that, then empty affix becomes so important. I usually always craft that empty affix. That's easier for me to do as an experienced player because I know what is going to sell or not. But especially on like jewelry or something that has, let's say the ring, like my ring that I showed, has 70 life, 2 resist, and an open suffix. Always craft the resist. Most new players are not going to search for the thing we showed here, which is this stat. Let's see. Where did it go? Oops, not open stack group. Give me a sec. There. Open suffix. Why can't I search for it anymore? Empty? There. Sorry. I don't know. I was searching for open. You can search for empty prefix, empty suffix, or just empty modifier. Most new players aren't going to search for this. So if you do throw the resist on, it'll show up in a lot more people. People search. And we'll talk a lot more about the searches on Thursday, but that is important to realize. And then you could also like peruse PoE trade, or sorry, pathofexile.com/trade for modifiers with hybrid items. They're like slightly more annoying to search for as well, but they do show up on the official website. Thankfully, they don't on PoE trade, but they do show up there. And the really, really nice thing is that it shows up whether the item rarity stat is a prefix or suffix. So that's really nice as well. So yeah, really, really nice that you can search for empty prefix and stuff like that. Yeah. Another thing that's a really, really good place to save money, or something that's good. If you have boots with, say you have boots with 70, 80 life, and then really high resistances, maybe like 80, 90 resistances, then if they don't have movement speed, most people aren't searching for them. Some people will search for them to try to bargain hunt. You can buy really cheap boots like that, but if you chuck 24 movement speed on there, which is 4 chaos, early on they're pretty much a guaranteed sell for at least 8. You'll at least make your money back, right? So that's a pretty no-brainer, and probably a good upgrade for yourself. And you can find bargain hunting like this. Maybe you'll be able to find some boots like that you can put movement speed on for yourself. And like I said, hybrid modifiers as well. If you list something for sale with 20 life and 110 resist, but it can actually craft 70 life, probably many people won't buy that or search for that. And the people that are doing it to bargain hunt and are not going to buy your item for how much it would be worth, which with that 4C craft. So that's pretty good to remember. Obviously, like searching for like really high total elemental resistance is really good. We'll be showing that on Thursday as well. Something that can, it doesn't always, but can increase the item by quite a lot of value. If you have like a topaz ring, for example, it's got 30 lightning rests implicit. Maybe you've hit 48 lightning rests on it and 15 all rests. Sometimes someone's kind of fucked up their gear and they actually need 100 lightning rests or 90 lightning rests on one ring, and you can kind of make bank on that sometimes. So if you do get one with like very heavy slanted resists, make sure you look, are there anyone actually similar to mine? Because if there's not, you can actually make a lot of bank on that, if there's none. Item level as well is obviously like fairly important. Depends if people are going to further craft the item or not. Like for example, it's item level 84 to hit the highest resist on items. And now the highest effective item level in the game is 86. There are currently no modifiers unless they add any new ones in 3.13. Like there's no difference between an item level 86 or item level 100. So important to keep in mind. And then most endgame mods are 84, 85, or 86. Very few at 86. 35 movement speed, for example, is at 86. And then if you find a divination card or a beast that gives you a 6th link, the base itself matters too. If you find a 6th link Val Regalia, that is worth a lot more than a 6th link Necromancer Silk, because that is, I might try to make a cheat sheet for what the best base types are. Going to the wiki will help as well, and we have talked about it in previous crafting guides. but it's not always easy in Path of Exile to know what the best bases are. Um, but again, like the most important bases to care about are the energy shield ones. Sorcerer Gloves, Sorcerer Boots, Hubris Helmet, Titanium Spirit Shield, Val Regalia. And then for the hybrid ES builds, Sadist Garb and Carnal Armor. So 6 things on those 3 chests would be worth a lot more. Most life builds can use pretty much any base. It doesn't really matter. It just comes down to like how easy it is to color them. But you know, generally a simple robe rare wouldn't be worth as much as like, you know, a glorious plate. And then something that matters a large amount for the price of an item is when it's influenced, because their item level matters so much. We're going to show you that a little bit. But the one extreme example here is, for example, a Crusader chest again. A 84 Crusader chest could often just be worth 1C or nobody's going to buy it. And early in the league, a item level 85 Crusader chest could be worth a large amount, because this is when the mod comes into play. It's only at 85. You cannot roll it on 84. And with a lot of influence mods, it is like that, where there's so many like amulets with item level 82 for +1 gem level, etc., where one level below it just won't sell. So make sure you care a lot about good bases, and decent item level can matter a lot. Let's see. That is pretty much all like the main things we have. A lot of it will be covered. Like we don't want to go too in depth in this because we have covered some before, and we are covering a lot of the trading stuff on Thursday. I think it was Thursday.